What's up, guys? That time of the week again. In preparation for the weekend, we're going to talk about what people are playing this week, what you might want to play this week, and what you might want to look out for next week. So let's get into it. Alright guys, so let's look at what is happening this week in geared PvP. So first we're going to look at which units are being played and how that has changed from last week. So overall, we didn't really have a big shift from last week. Obviously we're still seeing Gother as the number one most common unit, still seeing King and Escanor in terms of being the second and the third most common units that you're going to see when you click the search button. King and Escanor, 1% change from last week, that's in the noise. One interesting thing I saw this week was seeing more Hauser, and I don't really understand why that. We'll talk about that in a second, but I don't know why that is. But Hauser is up almost 5% from last week. Arthur's about the same. Helbram about the same. Merlin we're seeing a little more of, but again, that's not a huge change one way or the other. So again, as you can see from this table, number 1, number 4, number 5, number 6, all red units. So you can pretty much tell what this is going to look like when we start looking at team comps and when we start looking at color breakdowns. So let's look at the comps. What we talked about last week was the introduction of Escanor and how it was shifting things in the meta. So we were already seeing a lot of mono red as sort of anti-Escanor or pre-Escanor hate. We saw even more of that this week. So take a look at team number 2, Gother, Arthur, Hauser. We saw even more of that team this week compared to last week, which indicates that people just can't get enough of those Twigos. They just want to use the Twigo. They like the Twigo. They like looking at it. They like the way it makes them feel when they put Twigo in the sub. I feel that some people would actually like to put Twigo in the front 3. They just aren't quite sure, how people will react to that. Perhaps they think that it's too powerful and will give them an unfair advantage, and so I think they're doing the right thing by keeping him in the back and sticking with the Gother and the Arthur and the Hauser up front. So what we talked about last week was people are trying to figure out how to use Escanor, and the number 1 most common team we saw last week with Escanor was Gother, Escanor, King, coming in at about 30%. We're seeing a little less of that this week, so it could be that people have kind of experimented a little bit and they found that maybe that team wasn't as good as they thought, or maybe they're just trying out some different things. They probably saw a lot of mono red last week. Maybe they're thinking to themselves, oh, that looks kind of interesting, maybe I want to play mono red, because that sounds like maybe it's a fun thing to do. Or maybe they're just experimenting with their Escanor teams and using them in different ways. We did see a bump in number 5, which is Gother, Escanor, Merlin. So it could also be that the people who were running team number 1 are now running team number 5, and they've swapped out their king for that Merlin. To be honest, those teams are both pretty good. They've got different strengths and weaknesses, and it pretty much depends on which comp you're up against in terms of which one's going to be better. Clearly number 5 doesn't have the cleanse, so that's going to be its biggest weakness. If you're going up against Hauser or Gother and the only debuff that they have is the Gother attack seal, or the Arthur can't play healing cards debuff, then maybe having that cleanse isn't such a big deal. Maybe you're willing to forego King to get that nice ult dissolve from Merlin, and to get that nice cube to maybe block some of that Kingbrim CC. So there you have it. Basically, people are moving away from number 1 and number 5. More people are playing Gother, Arthur, Hauser. We're seeing a little bit less Kingbrim, which is interesting. People are still talking about how Kingbrim is cancer, blah, blah, blah. I don't know anybody who plays Kingbrim, so of course, I wouldn't know anything about that. Anyway, overall, not a huge change from last week. Still seeing the dominance of mono red. All right, and finally, we're going to take a look at our color circle here. Again, we came in right at around 55% last week in terms of red units being played. This week, right on top of where we were last week, almost exactly the same, right at 55%. Did see a little bit of a shift between the green and the blue, and surprisingly not in the direction that I expected. What I thought might happen was people would see the total dominance of the mono red, not dominance in terms of performance, but dominance in terms of what people are playing, They might look at that and say, oh, well, hell, I'll just put a bunch of blue units in and I'll go crush everyone's face and wreck them. I'll grind their bones into dust. But we didn't really see that this week. In fact, we have a little bit of a drop in terms of blue units, a little bit of a bump in terms of green units. I would say that's more Escanors being played, but we didn't really see a big change in that. Really, it looks like that shift is due to people moving away from the Blue King in the Escanor comp and moving towards playing Green Merlin in the Escanor comp. So really, not a big shift in the meta, to be completely honest. It's mostly divided between Kingbrum, Mono Red, and Escanor teams, and the shift we're seeing right here is really just people kind of experimenting with the Escanor teams, figuring out what the best comp is that they like to run. So what does that mean in terms of what you might want to run this weekend? Well, to be honest, it's not a whole lot different from this past week. With the shift away from King, so first of all, you've got to have a plan for Escanor. Like we saw, you're going to see a lot of Escanor. He was in about 55% of the matches over the last week. So 55% of the time, you're going to see him every time. And you can bank on that as long as that's true. Yes. So you got to have a plan for Escanor. Don't go in there with blue units without having a game plan. Otherwise, you're going to make some people really happy. But at the same time, I don't know that you would necessarily want to plan your entire strategy around Escanor. And what you might even do is kind of go for some step ahead counter meta here. What we saw is that the Escanor teams are moving away from the King and towards the Merlin. So what that could mean is you may be able to get a little bit of an advantage using that information to carry some more debuffs with you. So I know we're seeing less Kingbrum. That could be a reaction from the additional Merlins. Or it could just be a reaction of people, not thinking it's as good of a matchup against some of these comps. But, these Escanor teams that are running Merlin rather than King are not going to have heals, and they're going to be more susceptible to debuffs, provided you can get through Merlin's Q. So, when you're structuring your team for this weekend, maybe keep that in mind if you're trying to decide between units, and hopefully that will be some benefit to you guys. I'll also ask another question, just throwing it out there. What do you guys think would happen if you used a taunter like Red Gil, combined with some blue nuke damage in the back? That way you'd be surviving the Escanor because he has to attack your taunter, and you could use your blue DPS to just wreck the red team's faces. Just gonna throw that out there. So with that, we'll call it right there. I'll try to keep these videos short and to the point. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I'm going to maybe try to time these videos right before the weekend so people can kind of get a feel for what's being played before they go into the weekend and grind their matches. Trying to get that end of week ranking rewards. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more stuff.